I want to thank our guests today, Emily Ruddock and Selassie Davies of MASSCreative. Um, we have been working pretty closely with them and many of our other art service organizations. Boston Dance Alliance, Deborah, I see you there. Arts Boston, and I think some of the partnerships that we have formed and some of the stuff that we're doing is really important, and I'm super excited to have these two humans on the line to talk to you about what we need to be doing going forward. Oh yeah, yeah, I am living my best romper room life. Peter DeMuro, what's up? Just gonna give it a few more for folks to hop on. Oh, the chat is my favorite place. The chat is my favorite. Eva, I wish you guys had seen me just before you started. I'm trying, there's this bright, shiny angel light that's happening back there, and I was doing this, and Gina was like, yo, can I open the door or what? And I'm like, oh yeah, go right ahead, go on, go on. All right, friends. All right, it's looking like we have critical mass, so we are going to get started. Emily and Selassie, would you wave to the people? Hey, friends, and welcome. Feel free to unmute yourselves. So many of you got our action alert yesterday coming from MASSCreative. Thank you so much for signing on. This is not the first time you've gotten one of those from us. It will not be the last. And now is the time for us to take some serious action. There were a group of artistic directors that met with MASSCreative to sort of ask the question, how can we be more involved? How can we be stronger advocates for you and your work so that you can be stronger advocates for the sector? And like, right, super crassly, how do we get more money and support right now? And Emily and Selassie are going to tell us a little bit about how we can do that. And then it is on us to tell our artists, our audience, all of our supporters that this is important work and that they need to start sharing it out themselves. We can't sit back and keep being complacent. We've got to keep pushing it and keep being involved. Preaching a sermon over, Emily and Selassie, welcome.
Hey, y'all. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to be, thank you, Don, for inviting primarily Selassie first and then me to join and talk about a number of things. So I'm gonna hopefully not take up too much time and talk about a couple of like immediate items, and then Selassie's going to talk about sort of a longer term project that we're working on, the Create the Vote campaign, which I think is the moment we're in, right, is like there are many plates in the air and we need to be able to multitask around this work. So that'll be the framing, if that's cool. Thumbs up or thumbs down if you are horrified by this video. So I'm sure many of you over the last couple of weeks saw the incredible news that the state of Oregon just allocated $50 million in COVID-19 relief to the arts and cultural sector. That is amazing. And thanks to Temple, who actually did some R&D, we have a sense of, we have one perspective about how they arrived at that. And here's how they did it. They all banded together. It wasn't about the nonprofit sector. It wasn't about the for-profit sector. It was about the arts and cultural sector in Oregon. And so we have a couple of opportunities right in this very moment, as well as sort of thinking long-term about how we can all do that. So I'm going to start with the micro and then move to the macro. So right this very moment, the House, and this is the email that StageSource and Dawn sent out yesterday, the House is debating the economic development bond bill. So a bond bill, just so we're all clear, is not like a state budget. This sounds horrible, it's not real money, right? Like they pass this legislation and then the state goes out and like sells bonds to raise the money, and then that money is used. So everything that's in that bill is authorization for Baker, the administration, to spend if they have the money. So this is like step one of a multi-step campaign. So it started, so the other day, yes, if you have, I'm going to open up the chat, and as we're going, if you're like, Emily, this doesn't make any sense, let me know and I'll try and answer as quickly as possible. So on Friday, House Ways and Means released their version of the economic bond bill. It included $5 million to spend on infrastructure for artists and local museums to promote and connect with constituents and like audiences online. So it's basically like, this is money you can use to buy the infrastructure to like do online and virtual programming. It's really interesting that it was individual artists and local museums, right? Like this is how things happen. The other thing is that there was $5 million set aside for schools to use to connect with and make sure students have access to arts and cultural experiences by connecting with arts and cultural organizations virtually. The other thing that the original bill included was standing up a commission to study the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and cultural sector and make recommendations for relief. The restaurant industry got a very similar commission last month, and that's how they passed all of that policy work that allowed for like the cocktails to go to happen, right? So good news is there was actually some reference to the arts and cultural sector in that bond bill. Not so good news, it was like worded really weirdly, and there was more we felt we could do. So we worked with the chair of Tourism, Arts and Cultural Development on the House side, Paul McMurtry of Dedham. If you all have connections in Dedham, please let him know. We are so thankful for his leadership. To file to file 3 amendments, but 2 that I want to talk about today. One is to take that first fund, which is that $5 million for artists and local museums, increase it to $10 million, and make sure that any arts and cultural nonprofit is eligible for that money. So it's not just local museums, it's all of us. The other one was to create authorize $20 million for a special round of COVID-specific cultural facility funds grants, right? So if you're familiar with the Cultural Facilities Fund, that's a program that's run out of Mass Development, Mass Cultural Council. It allows it raises money, you can get grants for capital infrastructure projects. So when you need to like do the new HVAC system and nobody really wants to give you money for that, this fund does a matching grant program. So the idea is like, you've identified that these are the things you need. Yes, CFF typically does have bipartisan support. The other thing is that in Massachusetts, there are raging supermajorities in both the House and the Senate of Democrats. So oftentimes it's not a case of are the Republicans and the independents on board with this as well. It's actually like are in the spectrum of Dems who, the more conservative Dems, fiscally conservative Dems, are they on support of it? So that's how we look at it. But CFF is an incredible program, and it was actually stood up around the Great Recession to help arts and cultural organizations in that crisis. So again, like it's an existing program, authorize an additional round of that'll help all of us like keep our patrons and our staff safe, for goodness sake. So those were the 2 amendments. There was another one that was like a language change to that study commission, but we're not worried about that as much. Then, so as I said, like everybody coming together and doing a united push for the whole. So the Mass Production Coalition, which is the film and motion picture industry in Massachusetts, they have an amendment to make sure that their film tax credit extends past the sunset deadline. And then a lot of theater presenters and theaters have been really working hard to make sure that there's a pre-Broadway tax credit to incentivize producers to do pre-Broadway tryouts in Massachusetts. In a moment where it's really important for us to make sure that all of us are moving forward, we felt it was important to highlight those 2 amendments and make sure that we were giving voice to that work, right? We as a whole sector need support. It's not just the nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. So yesterday they started debating the bill. They got through basically 2 batches of amendments, because there's like over 500 amendments that were filed. They took care of, they really tackled housing, and they also tackled gaming, particularly sports gaming last night. They finished their session at 11. They gavelled in this morning at 10 a.m. The other piece is all the legislature's formal business, the goal is to have it done by July 31st, which is the end of this week. So they are like pushing a ton of legislation. So yesterday, the House is like debating this bill, and all of a sudden the Senate releases their version of the economic development bill. And in that version, they've authorized $20 million in spending for arts and cultural relief, right? And again, it's really around, it seems to be around infrastructure. So it's not just like, we have this huge deficit, what do we do? They have to direct it a little bit more specifically when it's a bond bill. That is great news that they just off the bat did 20 million, and it has fewer restrictions than the version that the House put out. So today we expect the House to finish up their version of it. Then the Senate will start tomorrow. Those 2 versions will then go into conference committee, where they will like hash out the differences. The legislature will pass their united version and send it to Baker for signing. Baker can veto, but last night we saw an example of Baker tried to veto like 2 things, and the House was like, we're not doing that, and overrode the veto like really quickly. They had to do with actually COVID-19 CARES Act spending. So why does this all matter, right? Because this is part of a larger whole for arts money and relief or money and relief for the sector. 2 weeks ago, the Senate held a listening session where the Mass Cultural Council released their study and their data around the impact of COVID-19 from a survey they did, where the reported amount of revenue lost from nonprofit arts and cultural organizations was $425 million. And the estimated cost to reopen the nonprofit arts and cultural sector. So that's not even like make everybody whole. This is just like get everybody back to work. Make sure you have enough PPE. Make sure that like you have you have the stanchions to make sure that people are moving safe and separated. Is $117 million. So those numbers are really helpful for us in our campaign and our work, because now legislators are like, okay, now I have a price tag I can deal with. So our strategy has been to like chip away at as many places as we can. So in a COVID a spending sup that was passed 3 weeks ago and signed into law last week, there was $2 million for small under 25 staff membered arts and cultural nonprofits. So we were like, okay, so that's $2 million. Now what we really need is $115 million, right? Because like that's the new number. So we saw opportunities in the economic development bond bill to like make that, to add to that number, right? To say like, okay, if you can give us 20 million, then that number is going to go down again, right? This is the longer work of getting money in Massachusetts. And this is also an unprecedented moment when like all bets are off, right? So yesterday, the GOP-controlled federal or U.S. Senate just released the HEALS Act, HEALS, not HEELS. There's some shade for the morning. And it doesn't include any aid. It includes very little aid to state and local municipalities. That's a big problem for us, because the state has no money. And so they're looking for the feds to do something, to like give them some money. So that's another advocacy area that we just need to push and continue to push on. Markey and Warren, our U.S. senators, are totally supportive of more money for state and local aid. That's not the problem. The problem is, frankly, the Republicans who are running the Senate who don't feel that way. And so this is a moment where if you have networks and friends who are in other states that have GOP senators who are in leadership, Susan Collins, you might want to consider reaching out and sending them a note and saying like, this would be the moment to reach out to your senators. My senators are on board with this. We need your senators too. So I've been a little all over the place, so I'm sorry. So this is this week, and especially today, it's all about getting as many co-sponsors on those amendments as possible, and getting as many messages to our state reps as possible. Because the way it works is like when enough people reach out to their legislators, the legislators go,
whoa, this is an issue I need to care about. This is something that is clearly important to my constituents. And then they go to either the House or Senate leadership and say like, look, I'm hearing about this from my constituents, and we need to do something about this. So in part, the reason that there was money in the House Ways and Means bond bill is because we did a lot of messaging. We've done a ton of messaging. So, and we've done a lot of emails thus far. So in the chat box, Emily, how would the $20 million in the bond bill get distributed? Through the MCC? Yes. So the MCC would probably be the distributor of that money. If it's a CFF fund, it would probably use the same sort of application process that they have for CFF. I know that a lot of us clocked that when the Mass Cultural Council started to redirect some of the grant funds that they still had in their account right as COVID-19 broke. It was only if you were eligible, if you were a gateway group or a CIP group, and then they used all of the NEA relief funds that they received to go directly to creative youth development organizations. And I know that many of us didn't see ourselves receive money in those 2 rounds. And that is hard. But the more money we can get, the way that they are trying to do it is trying to cover as many constituencies and cohorts as possible. So the more we are working to get more money, the more money there will be to go around, right? So it's not about like, why isn't my piece of the pie bigger? It's why isn't the pie bigger? And then, is there an up-to-date list of who is already co-sponsored that we can check? Oh, you betcha, Deborah Cash. I am going to put that right in the chat box. So we are constantly checking and seeing who's co-sponsored, and then we add them to the grid so you can see who's co-sponsored. Interestingly enough, Boston is like not actually a problem. Like the Boston reps are hearing from a ton of their constituents, and a fair number of them have signed on already, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't write to them because they need to hear that it's still important. And the way we do our messages is once someone has signed on as a co-sponsor, we shift, and the message that they get, that you are like the pre-populated message that you can send, actually says like, instead of like, please sponsor these amendments, it says, thank you for sponsoring one or many of these amendments, right? This is important, right? So it's not asking, but it's also thanking. This is the dual role of building relationships and communicating and building lines of communication. So what's ahead? I'd really hope that there was going to be more federal stimulus money that we could talk about this morning, or at least the glimmer of a hope of that. So we're going to have to do some pretty heavy advocacy on the federal level too. We tend to follow the lead of the Americans for the Arts, which is an arts advocacy organization that's set up in DC. And I'll put, after I promise you I stop talking, I'll put a couple of links in the chat box to help you with that. And then the other thing is that we expect that a 3-month state budget for fiscal year 21 is going to get released today. So usually, right, like the process is like every year the state puts together their budget, the legislature puts it together, and then the baker like signs it or doesn't, and we do the dance, and we were trying to get the Mass Cultural Council budget up $2 million in increments, right, like inch by inch. Well, this year, because revenue projections are completely blown apart because of COVID and the economic collapse, they have now moved to doing like month-to-month budgets, which basically is like they're using last year's budget numbers and like saying like, okay, in order to keep the doors open to state government, we'll just continue to give you that same amount of money. So they're now talking about doing a 3-month budget so they can like have, and in 3 months, they'll go back and actually do a full fiscal year 21 budget. At that point, we are going to have to push really, really hard to protect as much of the Mass Cultural Council budget as possible. And the reason that the Mass Cultural Council in this moment really matters is because it is the existing mechanism through which public support for the arts is distributed in Massachusetts, right? So those are my big things. This is where the ask comes to all of you. There's a voter voice, right? An action alert email that you can like click and it pre-populates and says like the canned message that I I hope you are appreciating, because they're crafted with my own hand. But then there's the more impactful messaging. So if you have the 5 minutes, click that link, just put your name, say something nice at the top, and like send it. But if you've got a little bit more time, write your own message, share your own story. If you're running an arts and cultural organization, let them know what the experience of it has been over the last 5 months, right? Share not only how hard it's been, but how people are still connecting with you and want arts and culture in Massachusetts, right? Like, this is the conversation. It's not just that we're hurting, but it's that, like, we are important and we are valued. We have economic value, we have communal value. These things matter, and the stories matter too. So if you have that extra time, do write that specific email. Michael asks, is it better to go through your portal or email them directly? It's better for my tracking purposes for you to go through my portal. It's better for the overall impact, that if you have a relationship with a legislator already, for you to just reach out to them directly. And if you're so inclined, feel free to forward me that email or forward me their response, because we also sort of try to clock and track that too. Are phone calls more effective, and is there a way to track those? Phone calls are oftentimes effective in this moment in time when the State House is not fully reopened and a lot of legislators and their staff are working from home. It's a bit of a crapshoot. Yeah. And is there a way to track those? No, I don't. We didn't buy the system where we can track the phone calls. I'm considering it for next time, but right now, no. And then this week feels urgent with the July 31st deadline looming. What's your advice for what happens next week and beyond? Yeah, so I think the thing, Temple, that's really interesting is, like, I could tell you in a normal legislative year what's my advice, right? It's they're going to go on August recess. They're going to go run for office. We should make sure that they're thinking about the creative community when they're running for office. And then we're going to develop our legislative agenda, because the 192nd legislative session, we do 2-year sessions in Massachusetts, officially starts January 1. But we're in this, like, incredibly bizarre moment. So continuing to reach out and talk with your legislators is what needs to happen right now. And if you don't have, I think, honestly, if you haven't sort of developed that relationship yet, cool, now's a great time. Just doing, like, if you put in your reminder, your email reminder, like every couple of weeks, just sending a note and saying, hey, Rep Hecht, I just wanted to give you an update about what we're doing here at New Rep. I'm really excited to share, we've been able to stand up this virtual programming. I'm hearing from subscribers about how they're ready to come back to the theater when we're able to open, but I'm concerned about these things. Like, tell them what's happening with you, build an honest relationship with them. In the goal and the point is to be top of mind and make sure that they know what you're going through. So Patrick asks, are state reps more important to contact than state senators? No. So in this moment, right, the action alert that we sent out was because the House was debating their version of the economic development bill. So we only need to talk to our state reps for, like, for the last 24, 36 hours. Because the Senate included already in their version $20 million for arts and culture spending, authorized that in their version of the bond bill, we probably won't do a huge, like, please, State Senator Brownsberger, like, adopt these amendments. What we will definitely do is we'll send out a thank you, right? Again, using the voter voice, like, here's how you can drop a note and say thank you to Senator Brownsberger for including that in the original draft and how important and meaningful that is. I think that this is something that we all know, right, in our donor cultivation. Thank yous are almost always more important than the ask, right? And that's the same thing with legislators. It's building relationships. And it's making sure that they hear from you, not just when you need something, but when they've helped you with something, or when you just want them to know what's happening, and check in with them. Okay. I want to stop talking and leave time to talk about this other initiative, because the thing of it is, right, we are all in this moment where at the same time that our sector is really suffering, our sector is having to ask itself some very difficult questions, and for some of us not so difficult questions, about what our role is as civic leaders and our responsibility towards issues of economic justice, racial justice. And at MASSCreative, we really take the approach that housing issues are artists' issues, transportation issues are artists' issues, etc. And so we, at the same time that we are trying to do very important and very meaningful long-term work around COVID relief for the arts and cultural sector, we're also trying to make sure that we are providing ways for the cultural sector to play our role as civic leaders. And so Selassie is going to talk about that. I'm then going to drop a few things in the chat box. And then at the end, if there are more questions, we can do it that way. Does that sound good, Dawn? All right, cool. Selassie, take it away, my friend.
Love it. Hi, I'm Selassie. I'm the operations manager at MASSCreative, and I'm just going to give a little context about myself, and then MASSCreative. I know several of you. I know your names. I know your orgs. You work with us. You partner with us, but framing it this way is actually what helped me understand more about the work MASSCreative was doing, and so I always like to reframe it. So again, I'm the operations manager. So right now I'm part of a 2-person team with Emily, and we are small but mighty, and so it's exciting to be able to do some programming conversations when usually I'm, just back in the office doing some financial operations work. So it's exciting to be a part of this today. But just context for me, I graduated from Wheaton College in Massachusetts. And my background is a women's and gender studies and film and new media double major. And so during my time at school and for a little while after, I was working in galleries and small advocacy organizations. And my work and my studies really emphasized a few things and, highlighted that where change began within both those spaces were, namely at the access of funding and power. And so when I started looking for work and I found MASSCreative, it felt like a really great fit with the understanding that the policy and advocacy work that was happening was really starting at the foundation of some of those issues that organizations and individual artists were seeing. And so, MASSCreative being founded by key stakeholders and organizations who saw the need for dedicated policy and sector-specific advocacy work, I totally understood that, and it made a lot of sense to me. MASSCreative's work being focused around working to ensure that the creative community is plugged in civically and participating in advocacy, and really to ensure the creative sector is getting the support that it needs. We launched our Create the Vote campaign in June of this year, and we launched it, I'm sure some of you have been part of this campaign for more years than I, but we certainly launched it a little bit differently than we'd done in years past, to my experience, and for a few reasons, right? We're growing and building our way of engaging with the sector and, with the world at large. We're in a really interesting moment in the midst of COVID, and understandably in the wake of, constantly evolving, glaring racial injustices happening. And one of the things that I think is really important in this moment and that we're highlighting as we move forward is we're not competing with the advocacy efforts of health and human services and racial justice initiatives, and similarly to other issues that Emily brought up, but we're working to support the advocacy work that's already happening and figuring out how the creative sector partners with those initiatives, with those groups, and how we support our community at large. And so I think that's our approach to it this year is really focused around that. Understandably, right, our legislators see those connections as they relate to their priorities, and it's important, fact check and reality check for us that we're not doing our work in a vacuum, and they certainly aren't able to make their decisions in a vacuum without looking at those other priorities on their end. I'll wrap up that by saying, as we're listening and growing much of the sector and the world, we shifted our work as a result, and so that's how we kind of get to the 2020 Create the Vote campaign. And so this year's Create the Vote campaign it was really important to us to have a shared leadership model. And so we actually have a steering committee, which StageSource and Front Porch Arts Collective are a part of. And that helps us think a little bit differently and a little bit about how we're not only thinking about our work, but how we are listening and broadening the way that we're doing our work with the direct input and thoughtful additions of our partners and fellow leaders in the sector. And then asking individuals and orgs to partner with us with the goal of uniting the whole creative community in this campaign to help support and strengthen civic engagement. So the three main priorities of the 2020 CTV campaign, we kind of structured them based on the year that we're having. So it's a census year, so that's one of the focuses and goals of this campaign. Ensure we're being counted and having accurate representation in our districts. You know, federal funds, how those are being allocated. You know, it's important data, and so that's a focus of our work in this campaign this year. Voter education and participation. Yeah, COVID has definitely changed how voting, what it looks like in the wake of COVID. You know, we're definitely going to see a very, you know, different approach. Safety for vulnerable communities is really important, and limiting the spread. And the other thing is, you know, not just for this year's campaign, but thinking about future campaigns, particularly, you know, started thinking really thoughtfully about our work for the future and how our campaigns have been in the past. And namely, are they inclusive? Have they been accessible? How we've been organizing our campaigns? Have we been thinking about, accessibility and how everyone, quote unquote, shows up to vote? What does that look like? And can we expand the way that we're educating and engaging people in that work? And then youth engagement. We have a pair of Bloomberg Arts interns. They're Boston Public School students doing incredible work. And their focus this year is to encourage voter registration, advocacy, and participation, but specifically they're working with their peers to get 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote. And so that's their work, their focus this summer. And so that's a really interesting, fun campaign. And watching them do this work is really exciting and reinvigorating to see how youth engagement is working and picking up. That's the background and goal of this work. I kind of leave it there. Again, a lot of you, I know you're already partnering with us and you've signed on, but you know, we certainly encourage others who haven't to join this campaign, pledge to create the vote as an individual and an organization. There'll be a link in the chat box, and also to, you know, share it with your networks if there are groups or people that you feel maybe you don't see on the website that we have it listed, that if you don't see them on there, say, hey, you know, I think this might be something you're interested in, you should sign on and join us in this work and become a partner with us as we try and, you know, engage our community and the community at large in what is a pretty, you know, big and important campaign for us. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it there. Questions, I think Emily and I could probably field together. I don't know if there were any questions already, but yeah, so yes, definitely. Census is the top tier of our campaign, voter education and participation, and youth engagement.
So Donna,
my
Donna,
question.
for those who haven't signed on or who have, what do you need us to do? So if you haven't signed on, pledge today. If you have signed on, the first, again, we're using the, what is it? It's the Prel commercial. Like, I told 2 friends and they told 2 friends and they told 2 friends. So if you have signed on, you use your platforms and your platforms to ask other organizations and other artists and creatives to join the campaign. And then we, the steering committee, will be sending out pretty regular communications about here's what you can do to help, here's information, and here's information you can share to do voter education, etc. Can you all speak about voting for by mail for a moment?
Yes, I can, if that's helpful. So what is, so 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago? My God, it feels like a minute ago. Signed in, there was a bill that was signed into law that put in place a number of provisions to strengthen and like protect voting in the face of COVID-19, right? Like I'm sure a lot of us watched what happened in Wisconsin, and thankfully we have a state legislature and that said like we're not going to do that. So there were a number of things that were included in that. One of them was that Secretary Galvin, State Secretary Galvin, had to mail all registered voters a application to apply to get a mail-in ballot. Here's mine. And basically, and it's postage paid. So basically, you fill this out, you mail it in, and they will send you a ballot for for the primary, and then they'll do it again for the general. Pascal sent hers last week. Good work, Pascal. And so the big thing is that like if you're not comfortable going to vote, this is a very good system to do it. And beyond the fact that they did this, they did things like they extended early voting periods, right? So there'll be physical in-person early voting periods. So you're not going to have the experience of standing on really long lines on election day or primary day. They also did things like there's going to have to be an online portal where you can apply to get a mail-in ballot. And then there's extended periods where they're counting the ballots. And we already saw this, actually, we already saw this in Kentucky, right? Where they took longer to announce the results of that primary because they were actually counting all of the mail-in ballots. Usually they do like, okay, this is the way it's trending and we expect the mail-in ballots to come in. But because there are so many more of them, they're taking longer. Excuse me, sorry, babe was very passionate about mail-in voting. So I have a lot of confidence that the way that the provisions have been set up, like your mail-in ballot will be counted. The other thing just to mention, and we're going to be sending out some info about this, is that if you've gone to the polls in Massachusetts, or anywhere, but specifically Massachusetts, you may have noticed the sort of demographic that are poll workers. And a lot of those folks are retired or identify as in an older, like a 65 plus age bracket. We know, right, that there's a lot of concern about folks in that demographic contracting COVID-19, right? And so already that we're sort of seeing the number, there's reason to believe that the number of poll workers of that demographic are just not going to sign up to do that work. But here's the thing about being a poll worker. It's like $25 an hour. And this is another place where we as the creative community could show up to strengthen democracy. So we know that this isn't creative work necessarily, but we know that there are people in our sector who are out of work, and that kind of one-day work could be meaningful. We also know that many of us aren't in that 65 plus demographic or 70 plus demographic, and and if we're in good health, could sign up to be a poll worker to make sure that there are the number of poll workers that we need in person, right? So we will be, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be sending out information to our partners to encourage the creative community to investigate and sign up to be poll workers. What does being on the steering committee entail? Sharing the burden, sharing the load, right? So we have a weekly steering committee meeting where we're sharing updates. What's really cool is that we've seen a number of our steering committee members like Elevated Thought, and they're not a publicly facing partner, but the Essex Community Creative Counties Initiative is actually putting together a little grant money to pay artists to create promotional materials to encourage people to vote. And Elevated Thought is doing a whole project with their youth around voter disenfranchisement and why registering to vote is so important this year. So so the steering committee is both like coming up with their own ideas about how they're leading this and sharing it. And we're amplifying it, and then are also taking the lead in terms of, we'll be doing some educational webinars, and they will be co-hosting those and helping set the direction. So there's some work here for steering committee members.
Emily, I'm just trying to remember the sort of graphics and all that beautiful stuff that Elevated Thought came up with. Is that something that they're putting out that we can share that other folks can use? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to have the final versions, and we're going to be adding that to our toolkit soon.
Yeah. Awesome. As soon as it comes out, StageSource will share it with you. It's some really beautiful, provocative artwork for messaging. It's incredible.
Dawn, will you talk about your experience of being on the steering committee and what that's all about? Why you decided to join?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for us, right, like, I think StageSource was probably, and Front Porch was probably better involved right at the beginning, right? There's just all of this messaging that we have sent out to folks. I think one of the things for me that I need to take ownership of as part of the steering committee is like continuing getting that messaging out. And like, it feels like everybody on the committee, we all sort of come in together weekly, check in with, hey, here are my questions, thoughts, concerns about one of these like sort of different topics. So whether it's the census, whether it's like last week, my question was actually similar to Temple's, which was I just got my vote by mail thing. And I'm hearing so many other people sort of talk about like, is this, can I trust this? And so I know that this week we'll probably talk a little bit about that. Like we get to sort of flesh out some of our questions. We get to also talk a lot about what other people are doing and then try to figure out how to share that work. I find that for me in particular, like the two things I am really sort of passionate about myself, that census piece, but also I think maybe because Emily, MASSCreative, you guys have been talking about this census piece from like day one of the pandemic, right? So it was something that I felt like we as StageSource had an easy way into, so sort of encouraging people to fill that out. But then, right, voter registration right now in this time feels like so necessary. So I think one of the other things is that there is a little, and Emily, if this is not what you want, but like I get to pick and choose. These are the things that I feel like really passionate about that I think we can share with our membership. They're going to be really interested in. And there is a little bit of, right, there is some of the DIY, right? Everybody gets to bring their sort of their own creativity to it and how they want to share and talk about things. And the weekly check-ins sort of keep us energized in pushing that work forward. That's my experience. What I would say is go to MASSCreative, go to the website, find out more, reach out to Emily, reach out to Selassie to see, like, again, if one of these topics is really sort of strikes a chord with you, how can you start talking about it? How can you start getting it out there? I think the thing that I am learning in this moment that we've always known, but it's just helpful to, it sucks that we're doing it this way. The more involved we are civically, the better it is going to be for our sector going forward. But it means not just showing up for ourselves and not just showing up when we need money, but like showing up for the whole thing so that we sort of establish trust, establish relationships, and that people start to sort of really understand how the arts sector impacts and is impacted by all of these things. So that has also been super, super helpful. And I think if we want to make real change, if we want to get stuff done, then we've got to get involved.
Dawn, you're recording this, so if I could just borrow that last thing, we may put it on social. Yes, that's the whole piece of this, right? We know how integral and interconnected our sector is to the community so that we serve, and we need to demonstrate that visibly. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for all of the work that you have done. And I am hoping that this group here and all of our networks will start to become more mobilized and more galvanized to help make change. I think my question for you, Emily, and you, Selassie, right now, anything like last things that you want to impart to us, the thing that you need us to do right now?
Reaching out to your elected officials. So civicness, I love it. Like, I think that you can use our voter voice, right, for the House. You can also look up, actually, here would be the thing, and I'm being dead serious because this has happened more than once. It actually happened to me. Like, look up and make sure you know who your state elected officials are, right? Know that there is that piece, right? Temple and I, like a couple years ago, did like a little quick exercise where we took a look at like who were the legislators, not just where the Huntington was, like not just that it was Brownsburg's district, but like who were the legislators who like whose students were coming to the Huntington, right? Like think about going through your audiences or your artist lists and seeing like who are the people, who are the constituents in which districts are really being touched by your work. So it's like a longer research project. But the immediate is like, make sure you know who your reps are. And then if you haven't reached out, reach out and just do a check-in. Sure, they're really busy, but their job is to take care, to pay attention to their constituents. And you can start building that relationship if you don't have one today, so that when you do need to make the ask, it's not the first time you've talked to them.
Friends, whoa, Temple, I've broken it out by audience, 3 years worth, and schools who send their students to matinees. Temple, how did you accomplish that?
So as you suspect, with some intern help, and it took a really long time. Oops, here, can you hear me now? It took a really long time, but I wanted to be able to say to a particular state rep or state senator, our building's not in your district, so therefore you don't care about me. But actually, 3,000 of your constituents have come to see shows here and are really engaged in the work that we do. So the people in your district participate in our programs. If next level, when the world returns, if I could get state reps and senators to a student matinee with the students and take that photo op, like that's the next thing. I'm saying it out loud so the universe can help make it happen.
Secret that, Temple, secret that. Yeah.
No, it's good for all of us, right?
No, I was talking about the secret.
You're funny. The other thing that we did, and this is really easy and it's all online, we separated everything out by zip code, basically, so that we could sort of match the right elected official with how many people were in a particular zip code. It is not a perfect system because zip codes and districts have nothing to do with each other, which is an endless frustration. So I offer that to you as well, but we did the best we could.
I'm just trying to look through the chat. So Michael asks, how much influence do local town legislators have at the state level? Well, two answers to that one. Yeah, a fair amount. Like they all talk. They do all talk, and they are all like. I think a great example is Vice Mayor of Cambridge, Vice Mayor Peter. It's Mellon, right, or Mallon? Mallon, yep. She's been a really big voice for arts and culture, and she has relationships with those reps, and she's using her voice for that. So that is also really important. But also, today's town elected official most likely is tomorrow's state rep, is most likely tomorrow's state senator, and in some cases is tomorrow's congressperson or state or US senator, right? So these, we're just like we were all interns once or staffers, and then we eventually built up, and some of us are leading organizations, right? We're ambitious. These people are ambitious and want to have other jobs, right, in elected office. And so building those relationships now totally pays off. A great example is Senator Brendan Crichton, who was a city councilor when I was in Lynn with him, then got elected as a state rep. We continued that relationship. He's now a state senator and is really supportive of the arts because he's seen what it does, right? So that all matters. Patrick says the primary is coming up. I assume it's also important to do some research to see if there might be a better alternative to our current rep who is running, who might be better for the arts. Patrick, you as an individual citizen are more than welcome to do that. This is where we run into the line, and I think this is really important to be clear. As 501c3 organizations, there are some things that you can do and some things that you can't do when it comes to elections. We've actually printed, it's actually in the link, you'll see it, a little do's and don'ts for nonprofits and elections. So as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, you cannot actively support one candidate over another. You cannot like do a report card that says like, here are all the votes that this state rep did, and here are all the votes that this other state rep did, and that's why we're supporting that state rep. So that's electioneering, and you can't do that. But what you can do is you can encourage everyone to take a look and get to know their state reps and who's running, and educate them. There's some really great organizations that are nonpartisan like us, like the League of Women Voters, for example, that do a lot of really good comparisons and voter education work in that space. So I just want to just clarify that, because sometimes people get a little scared, and that they're gonna sort of wade too far into the electioneering pool. And so we're trying to make that clear too with some educational materials. And Eva is making a plug for some really cool Somerville work that she voluntold me to do.
One of my
Dawn, I believe you live in Somerville, so I'll be following up with you later.
Oh yeah, I was totally gonna private message you about that. On it. You all are the best. Voluntold, still one of my favorite phrases. And electioneering, new one to me. Thank you. Don't do it. Electioneering, don't do it. My friends, this has been just a really lovely meeting. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Selassie and Emily, for talking to us. I hope that you are energized. I hope that you all will get out there and get involved. If I can, there are a couple of folks on here. Michael Temple, I know I'm going to be calling on you a little later to talk about some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So yeah, voluntold. It's happening. My friends, stay cool. It's real hot out there. You're the best. Bye.